The hum of a jet engine is a promise, of new destinations, of reunions, of escape. But for one man, on Starlight Airlines Flight 782 from London to New York, that promise was about to be broken. He thought his target was just a quiet teenage girl in seat 14B. He thought his cruelty, fueled by prejudice and a sense of entitlement, would go unnoticed at 35,000 feet. What he didn't know was that the girl's father wasn't just waiting for her at the airport. He was the man who held the safety of the entire aviation industry in his hands, and he was about to bring the full weight of that power down on a single flight for a single passenger, his daughter. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now let's get into it. The air in the cabin of the Boeing 777 was a sterile, recycled blend of anticipation and exhaustion. Starlight Airlines Flight 782 was 3 hours into its transatlantic journey, a silver dart cutting through the deep, endless blue above the clouds. For 17-year-old Amara Thorne, cocooned in seat 14B, it was a familiar limbo. An avid artist, she had her sketchbook open on her tray table, a pair of premium noise-canceling headphones over her ears, and the world reduced to the fine point of her graphite pencil. She was sketching the wing of the plane, capturing the elegant curve of its engineering against the impossible backdrop of space. The man in 14C, however, was a discordant note in her peaceful solitude. His name was Robert Caldwell, a man in his late 50s with a face that seemed permanently soured, as if he'd just bitten into a lemon. From the moment he'd squeezed past her to get to his seat, huffing with theatrical impatience, he had been an unnerving presence. He'd loudly complained to the flight attendant about the cramped conditions of his premium economy seat, slammed his briefcase into the overhead bin with unnecessary force, and made a point of sighing heavily every few minutes. His initial interactions with Amara were a masterclass in passive aggression. When she'd politely asked if he needed help getting his jacket settled, he'd shot her a dismissive look, his eyes flicking over her dark skin and the box braids that cascaded over her shoulder. "I can manage my own affairs, thank you," he'd clipped, his tone suggesting the offer was an impertinence. Amara, well-traveled and confident, was used to navigating the subtle and overt currents of prejudice. She'd felt the shift in atmosphere when she, a young black woman, sat in a premium cabin. She'd seen the double takes, the assumptions. Her father, Dr. Marcus Thorne, had always taught her to carry herself with unassailable grace to be the calm in any storm. So she simply gave Mr. Caldwell a small, polite nod and retreated into her own world. But Mr. Caldwell seemed determined to breach her defenses. He encroached on her space, his elbow consistently straying over the armrest. He'd let out a loud, performative sniff when she opened a small bag of complimentary almonds, muttering just loud enough to be heard, "Some people have no consideration for allergies." The first major friction point came when the flight attendant, a kind woman named Sarah with a warm smile, came to take their drink orders. "Miss?" Sarah asked, leaning towards Amara. "Just a ginger ale, please," Amara said, briefly lifting her headphones. Sarah smiled and then turned to Mr. Caldwell. "And for you, sir?" He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at Amara. "I'll have a coffee, black, and make sure it's hot. I can't abide by the lukewarm dishwater some airlines try to pass off these days." His gaze lingered on Amara for a second too long, a smug little smirk playing on his lips, as if he'd just delivered a clever line in a play only he was watching. Amara felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was the weariness of having to constantly decipher intent, to gauge whether an insult was imagined or real. But this felt pointed, deliberate. She put her headphones back on, turning up the volume on her lo-fi playlist, and focused on the intricate details of the jet engine in her sketch. It was a marvel of human ingenuity, a symbol of order and precision. It was everything the man beside her was not. An hour later, the cabin lights were dimmed to allow passengers to rest. A soft glow emanated from the personal entertainment screens. Amara, absorbed in her drawing, shifted slightly in her seat to get a better angle on the page. In doing so, her elbow gently brushed against Mr. Caldwell's arm. It was the barest of touches, a fleeting contact of fabric against fabric. His reaction was instantaneous and explosive. "Watch it," he hissed, yanking his arm away as if he'd been burned. His voice, though low, was sharp enough to cut through the cabin's hum. Amara flinched, pulling her headphones down. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice genuine. "I didn't mean to—" "Of course you didn't," he sneered, his eyes narrowed into slits. "You people are all the same. No concept of personal space. Clumsy." The slur hung in the air, thick and vile. "You people." It was no longer subtle, it was a declaration. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. The calmness her father had taught her felt a million miles away. "I said I was sorry," she repeated, her voice firmer this time, refusing to shrink under his glare. "It was an accident." "An accident that seems to happen a lot," he shot back, leaning into her space now, his voice a venomous whisper. "Pushing, shoving. Always have to make your presence known, don't you?" A few nearby passengers began to stir, sensing the ugly turn in the conversation. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowed with concern. The flight attendant, Sarah, who had been collecting trays a few rows up, noticed the tension and began walking towards them. Amara held his gaze, refusing to be the one to look away. "I think you're mistaken about who is making their presence known, sir." The challenge in her voice, quiet but clear, seemed to enrage him further. His face, already ruddy, deepened to a shade of crimson. He saw Sarah approaching out of the corner of his eye, and it was as if a switch flipped in his brain. He wanted to escalate, to assert his dominance before she could intervene. He looked down at the full cup of hot black coffee resting on his tray table. Then he looked at Amara's sketchbook, at the clean white page filled with her careful, precise lines. And with a sudden, vicious movement, he picked up the cup. The world seemed to slow down, contracting to the space of a single airplane seat. For a split second, Amara saw his intention reflected in the cold fury of his eyes. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. There was only malicious resolve. He didn't just spill the coffee, he threw it. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the scalding black liquid arcing through the air. It wasn't aimed at her sketchbook or the floor, it was aimed at her. The coffee, still steaming from the pot, struck her on the thigh and hand. The pain was immediate and searing, a sharp electric shock that made her cry out. It was a pain that felt both hot and cold at once, a deep, burning ache that radiated through her skin. The dark liquid soaked through her jeans instantly, plastering the hot, wet fabric against her leg. A few errant drops splattered across her drawing, the intricate lines of the jet engine blurring into an ugly brown stain. "Oh my God!" a woman in the row behind gasped. Amara recoiled, scrambling to get away from the source of the pain. But there was nowhere to go. She was trapped between the burning on her leg and the man who had caused it. Tears of shock and agony sprang to her eyes. Mr. Caldwell set the empty cup back on his tray table with a clatter. He looked down at her, a twisted, triumphant smile on his face. "Now look what you made me do," he said, his voice dripping with false innocence. "So clumsy. You should be more careful." His words were a second assault, more insidious than the first. He was trying to frame it as her fault, to gaslight her in front of an entire cabin. But the act was too blatant, too vicious to be misinterpreted. The flight attendant, Sarah, broke into a run, her professional composure shattered by disbelief. "Sir!" she cried, arriving at the row. She saw Amara clutching her leg, her face pale with pain, and the dark stain spreading across her jeans. "What happened?" "The girl bumped my arm," Caldwell said smoothly, already constructing his lie. "Startled me. It was an accident." "That's a lie." The man across the aisle, a gentleman named Mr. Davies, interjected, his voice booming with indignation. "I saw the whole thing. He threw it at her. Deliberately." Sarah's training kicked in. Her first priority was Amara. "Miss, are you okay? Let me help you." She knelt in the aisle, her face a mask of concern. "We need to get some cold water on that right now." She turned and pressed the call button for her colleagues. "I need a first aid kit and all the bottled water you can find now." Another flight attendant, a young man named Ben, hurried over. The quiet murmur of the cabin had now grown into a low roar of outrage as passengers realized what had transpired. Phones were being subtly raised, recording the aftermath. Caldwell, realizing his narrative was crumbling, doubled down. "This is absurd," he blustered, trying to project authority. "I am a platinum medallion member with this airline. This girl was harassing me and now she's putting on a show to get some sort of compensation." Amara could barely process his words through the throbbing pain in her leg. The burn felt deep, and a wave of nausea washed over her. Sarah and Ben were gently trying to help her stand up to move her to the galley. "Let's get you to the back, honey," Sarah said softly. "We'll take care of you." As they helped her limp down the aisle, Amara looked back over her shoulder. She saw Mr. Caldwell sitting back in his seat, folding his arms with an air of aggrieved entitlement. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, a smirk of satisfaction still etched on his face. He believed he had won. He had put the uppity black girl in her place and was confident his status and his carefully constructed lies would protect him. He thought this was the end of the incident. But as Amara reached the relative sanctuary of the galley, the tears of pain began to mix with a cold, rising anger. She thought of her father. He wasn't just any dad. He had spent his entire life dedicated to rules, to safety, and to consequences. He believed that every action, especially in the tightly controlled environment of an airplane, had a reaction. Sarah was dousing cloths in cold water and gently pressing them to Amara's leg. "We've notified the captain," she said, trying to be reassuring. "We're taking this very, very seriously." Amara nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying out again. The pain was bad, but the humiliation felt worse. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty he had that he could get away with it. That was the real wound. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Can I use the in-flight phone?" she asked, her voice trembling but resolute. "I need to make a call." Sarah looked surprised. "It's usually for emergencies, honey, and it's very expensive." Amara met her gaze, and for the first time Sarah saw something beyond the pain in the young woman's eyes. It was a steely resolve that seemed far older than her 17 years. "This is an emergency," Amara said, her voice dropping, gaining a strength that silenced the galley. "And I assure you, my father will cover the cost." The in-flight satellite phone felt heavy and alien in Amara's hand. In the cramped, sterile environment of the galley, surrounded by the hushed, concerned faces of the flight crew, the act of making a call felt monumental. It was a breach of the unspoken rules of air travel, a direct line from this sealed metal tube to the world below. Ben, the male flight attendant, had to get authorization from the captain to activate the phone for a passenger. The captain, a seasoned pilot named David Chen, had already been briefed by Sarah and had heard the passenger testimonies being relayed by the crew. He'd logged the incident as a Level 2 threat, physically abusive behavior, and had already begun the process of notifying Starlight Airlines ground control of a disturbance on board. When the request for the SAT phone came through, he authorized it without question. Something about the crew's description of the girl's quiet dignity and the man's unrepentant aggression told him this was far from over. Amara dialed the number from memory. It was a private line, one she was only ever to use in a true crisis. As the phone rang, a strange calm settled over her. The searing pain in her leg was still there, a constant throbbing reminder of the violation. But her mind was clear. The phone was answered on the second ring. Thorne. The voice was deep, calm, and instantly recognizable. It was the voice that had read her bedtime stories, the voice that had explained the physics of flight when she was 10, and the voice that had, just yesterday, told her he was proud of her. Dr. Marcus Thorne. "Dad," Amara said, and her voice broke, the single word carrying all the pain, shock, and fear she'd been holding back. "Amara," What's wrong? Where are you? The calm in his voice was instantly replaced by a razor-sharp edge of concern. He knew this number. He knew what it meant for her to be calling it. I'm on the plane. Flight 782, she managed, tears now streaming silently down her face. A man. He threw coffee on me, hot coffee, on purpose. There was a pause on the other end of the line, but it wasn't a pause of inaction. It was the silence of a powerful engine engaging. Amara could practically hear the gears turning in his mind, processing, analyzing, and formulating a plan. Sarah gently placed another cool compress on her leg, offering a silent gesture of support. Are you hurt? His voice was low and controlled, but laced with a barely contained fury. Yes, my leg and my hand. It hurts, Dad. He said horrible things. He did it because I'm black. The words tumbled out, the ugly truth of it finally spoken aloud. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was transformed. It was no longer just her father. It was the voice of Dr. Marcus Thorne, the Assistant Administrator for the Federal Aviation Administration, in charge of the Office of Aviation Safety. It was the voice that commanded the respect of airline CEOs, federal investigators, and air traffic controllers across the nation. Amara, listen to me very carefully, he said, his tone precise and commanding. What is the name of the man who did this? I don't know his name. He's in seat 14C. He's older, white, in a gray suit. Okay, the crew is with you? Yes, they're being really nice. Good. Put the head flight attendant on the phone. Amara looked at Sarah, who was watching her with wide, compassionate eyes. My father wants to speak with you, she whispered, handing the phone over. Sarah took the phone, her expression a mixture of confusion and deference. Hello, this is Sarah Jennings, the purser on Flight 782. To whom am I speaking? Miss Jennings, the voice on the other end said, and even through the phone's tinny speaker, it carried an unmistakable weight of authority. This is Dr. Marcus Thorne. I am the Assistant Administrator for Aviation Safety with the FAA. I am also the father of the young woman who was just assaulted on your aircraft. Sarah's eyes widened in stunned recognition. She knew that name. Everyone in the airline industry knew that name. It was like a police officer getting a call from the Attorney General. She stood up a little straighter. Dr. Thorne, sir, I am so sorry for what has happened. We have the situation under control and are providing first aid to your daughter. The captain has been notified and we are following protocol. I appreciate that, Miss Jennings, Marcus said, his voice cold as ice. But we are now moving beyond standard protocol. You are currently in international airspace, but you will soon be entering U.S. airspace. When you do, your captain will be contacted by the New York Air Route Traffic Control Center with a specific set of instructions. He is to follow those instructions to the letter without deviation. Is that understood, sir? Yes, understood. I will relay that to Captain Chen immediately. Secondly, I want the assailant identified. Check your passenger manifest for the man in seat 14C. I want his name. Right away, sir. Ben was already scrambling for the tablet containing the flight manifest. Third, under no circumstances is that man to be served any more alcohol. He is not to leave his seat unless escorted by a crew member. If he becomes verbally or physically aggressive in any way, you have my full authorization to use any and all necessary restraints. Your crew will be fully supported by my office. Do you understand? The implication was clear. Dr. Thorne was giving them federal backing to handle the situation with zero tolerance. Yes, sir, absolutely. Ben returned, showing Sarah the name on the tablet. The passenger in 14C is Robert Caldwell, Sarah relayed into the phone. Robert Caldwell, Dr. Thorne repeated slowly, the name seeming to solidify into a target. Thank you, Miss Jennings. Please give the phone back to my daughter. Sarah handed the phone back to Amara. Honey, your dad, she started, her voice full of awe. Amara put the phone back to her ear. Dad? I'm here, sweetheart. Now you just listen to the crew. They're going to take care of you. I'm handling everything on the ground, everything. When you land, I'll be there. I love you. I love you too, Dad. The line went dead. Amara handed the phone back to Sarah. The atmosphere in the galley had shifted entirely. The flight attendants were no longer just dealing with an unruly passenger. They were now participants in a situation that had escalated to the highest levels of the aviation industry. Back in seat 14C, Robert Caldwell was feeling smug. He'd seen the girl being led away, crying. He'd heard the concerned whispers of the passengers and seen the disapproving looks from the crew. He didn't care. He felt vindicated. He'd made his point. He requested another coffee from a passing flight attendant, who simply looked at him, said no sir, and continued walking. Caldwell scoffed, attributing her refusal to petty vindictiveness. He settled back in his seat, put on his own headphones and closed his eyes, completely oblivious to the storm that was gathering. A storm being personally directed by one of the most powerful men in the sky, thousands of miles away. He was about to learn that some actions don't just have reactions. They have consequences of a magnitude he couldn't possibly imagine. For the next 2 hours, an invisible shield seemed to form around seat 14. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisle with practiced efficiency, attending to other passengers, but they created a wide berth around Robert Caldwell. His requests for drinks were ignored. His attempts to catch a crew member's eye were met with blank, professional stares. The passengers around him, having witnessed the assault, treated him like a pariah. Mr. Davies across the aisle stared at him with open contempt, while others would whisper and point whenever he shifted in his seat. Caldwell's smugness began to curdle into irritation, then anger. This wasn't the deference he was used to. He was a senior partner at Sterling Strategy Group, a high-powered consulting firm in Washington, D.C. He advised congressmen, dined with lobbyists, and shaped corporate policy. People listened to him. People served him. This silent, collective shunning was an infuriating new experience. He chalked it up to an overzealous crew in a cabin full of bleeding hearts. It didn't matter. Once they landed, he would file a formal complaint that would have them all reprimanded. In the cockpit, Captain David Chen was experiencing a very different reality. As Flight 782 crossed the navigational waypoint that marked its official entry into United States airspace, his radio crackled to life. Starlight 782, this is New York Center, the voice from Air Traffic Control said, calm and professional as always. How do you read? New York Center, Starlight 782, reading you 5 by 5. Captain Chen responded. Starlight 782, be advised, we have a new directive for your arrival. You are to maintain your current heading. On approach to JFK, you will be rerouted. You will not be proceeding to your assigned gate at Terminal 4. I repeat, you will not be proceeding to Terminal 4. You will be directed to the designated hard stand at the airport's northwest perimeter. Acknowledge. Captain Chen's blood ran cold. The northwest hard stand wasn't a passenger area. It was a remote, isolated patch of concrete used for de-icing in winter, for planes with severe maintenance issues, or for law enforcement and federal agency operations. Directing a commercial flight full of passengers there was unheard of, short of a bomb threat or a hijacking. New York Center, confirmed Starlight 782, is being rerouted to the northwest hard stand, he asked, his voice tight. That is affirmative, Starlight 782. You will be met on the ground by airport authorities. The nature of the escort will be specific. Follow all instructions from the ground crew without question. The co-pilot looked at Chen, his eyes wide. What the hell is going on? Did that guy in 14C call in a threat? I don't think he called anyone, Chen said, his mind racing back to the purser's report. The phone call. The girl's father, Dr. Marcus Thorne. It was all starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. This wasn't a standard airline response to an unruly passenger. This was a federal intervention. Captain Chen keyed his intercom. Miss Jennings, please come to the cockpit. Sarah arrived a moment later, her expression tense. Sarah, Chen said, keeping his voice low. "Your report about the passenger in 14C, the girl's father. You're certain he said he was with the FAA?" "Yes, Captain," she replied. "He said his name was Dr. Marcus Thorne, Assistant Administrator for Aviation Safety." Chen let out a long, slow breath. "We've just been rerouted by air traffic control. On his orders, I suspect. We're not going to the gate. We're being sent to a remote stand. The kind they use for security incidents." The color drained from Sarah's face. She had worked for the airline for 15 years and had never once landed a passenger flight at a hard stand. "When we land," Chen continued, his voice firm and authoritative, "no one gets off this plane. The ground staff will not be bringing a jet bridge. The doors remain sealed until we are given explicit clearance by the authorities meeting us on the tarmac. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Captain. And one more thing. Go back and make a cabin announcement, standard arrival stuff, but add that due to an unforeseen ground traffic issue at JFK, all passengers must remain in their seats with their seatbelts fastened after we have parked. No exceptions." As Sarah walked back to the cabin, the pieces began to click into place. The full weight of what Robert Caldwell had done was beginning to dawn on her. He hadn't just assaulted a teenage girl. He had, in his blind arrogance, assaulted the daughter of a man who commanded the very system that was keeping them all safe in the air. The descent began. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on. Robert Caldwell, oblivious, stretched his arms and looked out the window, anticipating a smooth arrival and a quick exit. He noticed the plane seemed to be taking an unusual route, taxiing for far longer than normal after landing, away from the familiar terminals. He saw the flashing lights of police cars and black SUVs racing alongside the plane on the tarmac. "What's all this about?" he muttered to himself, annoyed at the delay. He assumed there must be a dignitary or celebrity on board causing all the fuss. The plane finally came to a complete stop in a vast, empty expanse of concrete, with the glittering skyline of New York City far in the distance. The engine spooled down into an unnerving silence. Caldwell, like everyone else, unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to stand up. Then, Captain Chen's voice came over the PA system, calm, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of command. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at JFK. However, as mentioned, due to a ground situation, we ask that you all remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. I repeat, all passengers must remain seated. The cabin doors will not be opening at this time. Please await further instructions. Thank you for your cooperation." A confused murmur spread through the cabin. Robert Caldwell clicked his tongue in annoyance, tapping his expensive watch. "Incompetence," he growled under his breath. He leaned into the aisle, trying to get a better view out the window. And then he saw it. A mobile staircase, the kind used for presidential arrivals, was being slowly driven towards the main cabin door. At the bottom of the stairs, a group of people was assembling. They weren't baggage handlers or gate agents. They were men in dark suits, Port Authority police officers, and at the very center of the group, a tall, imposing black man in a tailored overcoat, his face set like granite. He stood with an aura of absolute unshakable authority. It was Dr. Marcus Thorne, and he was looking right at the plane. Suddenly, Robert Caldwell felt a cold, unfamiliar prickle of fear. This wasn't about a dignitary. This wasn't a delay. This was for him. The silence in the cabin was now thick with tension. Every passenger was glued to the windows, watching the surreal scene unfold on the tarmac. The mobile staircase docked against the fuselage with a soft thud that echoed like a gavel in the quiet plane. Then a sharp, authoritative knock sounded on the cabin door. Sarah Jennings took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and opened it. 2 Port Authority police officers and an airline executive in a Starlight Airlines suit stepped inside, but they all stood aside to make way for the man who followed them. Dr. Marcus Thorne stepped onto the aircraft. He didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like a 4-star general taking command of a battlefield. His eyes, cold and analytical, swept the cabin, taking in the faces of the passengers, the crew, and finally, they locked onto Robert Caldwell in seat 14C. Caldwell felt a jolt, as if he'd been hit with a taser. He recognized the man from news reports and industry conferences. This was not just some angry dad. This was one of the most powerful figures in global aviation. Dr. Thorne walked down the aisle, his polished shoes making no sound on the carpet. He moved with a purpose that parted the air in front of him. The passengers instinctively shrank back in their seats. He stopped at row 14. He didn't look at Caldwell. He looked at the empty seat beside him, 14B, where his daughter had been sitting. He saw the dark, ugly coffee stains on the seat and the floor. He then looked at Amara's sketchbook, which she had left behind, the beautiful drawing ruined. Only then did he turn his gaze to Robert Caldwell. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it filled the entire cabin. It was a voice devoid of heat, a voice of pure, compressed power. "Robert Caldwell," he stated. It wasn't a question. Caldwell, accustomed to blustering his way through any conflict, found his throat dry. He tried to project an air of indignant confusion. I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Dr. Thorne took another step closer, his presence seeming to suck the oxygen out of the air. "You assaulted a minor on this aircraft. My minor, my daughter." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. "Assaulting a passenger and creating a disturbance on an aircraft in flight is a federal offense, Mr. Caldwell. It falls under Title 49 of the U.S. Code. It carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison." Caldwell's face went pale. This was spiraling out of his control with terrifying speed. "Now hold on," he stammered, trying to rally his usual arrogance. "It was an accident. The girl was clumsy, she bumped into me, and I spilled my coffee. It was a simple mistake, and frankly, this entire reaction is completely disproportionate." Dr. Thorne's expression didn't change. He simply tilted his head slightly. "Disproportionate? Let me tell you what I did in the last 2 hours, Mr. Caldwell. First, I had your name and seat number cross-referenced with your travel records. Robert Caldwell, senior partner at Sterling Strategy Group, frequent flyer. A man who, according to airline records, has lodged 6 prior complaints against flight crews in the last 2 years, 3 of which involved accusations against female flight attendants of color." Caldwell's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Then," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice dropping even lower, "I made a call to the Port Authority Police Department and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which handles all security incidents at JFK. I informed them that there was a credible Level 2 assault on a minor in flight. I then used my authority to have this aircraft redirected to a secure location to ensure the immediate apprehension of the suspect without incident." He gestured vaguely towards the cockpit. "Your captain was following my direct orders, transmitted through FAA channels via air traffic control. Every single person on this flight has been inconvenienced because of you." He took one more step, and now he was looming over Caldwell. "And as for your accident story, I've already been briefed by the flight crew. I have the preliminary statements of 3 passengers who witnessed you verbally harassing my daughter before deliberately and maliciously throwing scalding coffee on her. One of them, a Mr. Davies in 15A, is a retired attorney who is more than happy to testify under oath about your unprovoked aggression and the racial slurs you used." The name, Mr. Davies, hit Caldwell like a physical blow. He glanced across the aisle and saw the older man looking back at him, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. He had been so sure no one would dare to contradict him. This is insane," Caldwell sputtered, his voice now a desperate squeak. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue you. I'll sue the airline." Dr. Thorne almost smiled. It was a chilling sight. "You can certainly try, Mr. Caldwell, but you'll be doing it from a federal detention center. You see, the FAA takes safety and security above 30,000 feet very, very seriously. When a passenger decides to physically assault another passenger, they are no longer just a rude individual. They become a threat to the stability and order of the entire flight, and we deal with threats swiftly and decisively." He turned to the 2 Port Authority officers who had been standing silently at the end of the aisle. "Officers, this is the man. He is to be taken into custody." The officers moved forward. "Mr. Caldwell," one said, his voice firm, "please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Reality finally crashed down on Robert Caldwell with the force of a physical impact. The tailored suit, the platinum status, the powerful job, none of it mattered. In the sealed cabin of this airplane, under the icy gaze of Marcus Thorne, he was just a criminal. As the officers cuffed him, the passengers who had been watching in stunned silence began to applaud. It started with one or two people, then spread through the cabin like a wave. It was a spontaneous, unified release of tension and an expression of gratitude. They were applauding not just the arrest, but the sight of justice being delivered so swiftly and completely. Caldwell's face, which had been pale with fear, now burned with a deep, furious red of humiliation. He was frog-marched down the aisle, past the rows of people he had considered beneath him, his head bowed in shame. As he passed Dr. Thorne, he shot him a look of pure hatred. "You'll pay for this, Thorne," he hissed. Dr. Thorne didn't flinch. He simply looked at the pathetic, defeated man in front of him and delivered his final, devastating assessment. "No, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice calm and clear. "You already have. You just don't know the full price yet." He then turned and walked towards the galley where his daughter was waiting. The authority figure vanished, and in his place was just a father, his face finally softening with love and concern as he went to see his child. The initial price for Robert Caldwell was immediate and public. Being led off a plane in handcuffs in front of over 200 passengers, each with a smartphone, was a humiliation from which his ego would never recover. Videos of his perp walk down the aisle, set to a soundtrack of applause, were online before the plane had even been towed to its actual gate. The hashtags #CoffeeCaldwell and #StarlightAssault were trending on Twitter within the hour. But that was just the overture. The real symphony of his unraveling was being conducted by Dr. Marcus Thorne, a man who understood that true consequences were not loud and explosive, but quiet, systematic, and absolute. Caldwell spent the first 48 hours in a federal holding facility near the airport. He was arrogant and belligerent at first, demanding his lawyer, dropping the names of senators he knew, and threatening lawsuits. He believed his position at Sterling Strategy Group, a titan in the world of DC lobbying and corporate consulting, made him untouchable. He was wrong. His first call was to his firm's managing partner, a man named Julian Croft. He expected sympathy and the immediate deployment of a team of high-priced lawyers. What he got was a glacial wall of corporate detachment. "Robert," Julian's voice was strained, "we've seen the videos. The board has been in an emergency session all morning." "It's a misunderstanding, Julian," Caldwell insisted. "A complete fabrication by a girl looking for a payout and an overzealous father. Her father is Dr. Marcus Thorne, the head of the FAA's Office of Aviation Safety," Julian said flatly. "And the payout she's looking for appears to be federal assault charges. Robert, do you have any idea who you picked a fight with?" "He's using his position to railroad me." "No, Robert," Julian corrected, his voice losing all warmth. "He's using his position to enforce the law you broke. There's a difference. We have a reputation to protect. Our clients include 3 major airlines and several aerospace manufacturing companies. We have multi-million-dollar contracts that depend on our relationship with the FAA. Having a senior partner charged with assaulting the daughter of the FAA's safety chief on a commercial flight is not ideal." The word ideal was a dagger. In their world, it meant catastrophic. "So, what are you saying?" Caldwell asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "I'm saying that the board has voted unanimously to place you on indefinite unpaid leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. We are invoking the morals clause in your partnership agreement, and our legal team. They can't represent you in a criminal matter of this nature. It's a conflict of interest. You'll need to find your own counsel." The line went dead. The first pillar of Caldwell's world had crumbled. The next to fall was his professional standing. Dr. Thorne didn't need to make threats or pull strings. He simply let the system he oversaw work as it was designed to. The FAA, citing the severity of the in-flight assault, immediately placed Robert Caldwell on the federal no-fly list. It was a permanent designation. For a man whose career depended on international travel, it was a corporate death sentence. Then came the quiet phone calls. Not from Dr. Thorne, but from his deputies and colleagues, the people who ran the intricate machinery of the aviation world. A deputy administrator for security would call a contact at a major defense contractor, for whom Sterling Strategy Group was a key lobbyist. "Just giving you a heads up," the call would begin, "about the ongoing investigation into the incident on Flight 782. The charges are significant. We're taking it very seriously." No explicit threat was needed. The message was clear. Association with Robert Caldwell was now toxic. Within a week, 3 of Caldwell's largest accounts, totaling over $10 million in annual billing for Sterling, had pulled their contracts, citing reputational concerns. Julian Croft called Caldwell again. The conversation was much shorter this time. His partnership was being terminated. He was to have his personal effects cleared from his office by the end of the day. The social fallout was just as brutal. Caldwell lived in Potomac, Maryland, a world of country clubs, charity galas, and political fundraisers. News of his violent, racist outbursts spread like wildfire. Invitations to upcoming events were rescinded. Friends stopped returning his calls. His wife, mortified by the public scandal and the whispers at the club, packed a bag and went to stay with her sister in Palm Beach, leaving him alone in their cavernous, silent mansion. His life, once a monument to power and influence, was being dismantled brick by brick. He was a pariah in the industry he once dominated, and a disgrace in the social circles he had so carefully cultivated. He tried to fight back, hiring a cut-rate PR firm to float a story about him being the victim of a woke mob and a powerful government official's vendetta. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The videos were too clear. The passenger testimonies, especially that of the retired attorney Mr. Davies, were unimpeachable. The narrative wouldn't stick. The final crushing blow came from the justice system. Facing incontrovertible evidence and intense public scrutiny, the U.S. Attorney's Office offered him a choice: go to trial and face the maximum sentence of 20 years, or plead guilty to a lesser charge of assault resulting in bodily injury, which carried a mandatory sentence. His expensive, privately retained lawyer laid it out for him. "They have you, Robert. They have you on video, they have a dozen witnesses, and they have the Thorne family, who will be the most sympathetic victims a jury has ever seen. You have no defense." Trapped and defeated, Robert Caldwell, the man who believed he was above consequences, was forced to accept the plea. The hard karma had hit. It hadn't been a single dramatic lightning strike, but a slow, grinding, and complete demolition of a life built on a foundation of arrogance and hate. He had poured a cup of coffee and, in return, had his entire world washed away in the flood. The morning of the sentencing dawned cold and gray over Manhattan, the sky the color of slate. From their suite on the 40th floor of a hotel overlooking Central Park, the city below seemed muted, a sprawling diorama of a world holding its breath. Amara Thorne stood by the vast window, tracing the condensation with her fingertip. She wasn't looking at the view. Her gaze was turned inward, replaying the events of the past few months, the journey from a terrified girl in an airplane galley to the young woman she was today. Her father, Dr. Marcus Thorne, entered the room, carrying 2 cups of tea. He didn't say anything, simply handed one to her and stood beside her, his presence a silent, unshakable pillar of support. He had been her anchor through the depositions, the legal meetings, and the relentless media attention. He had handled the storm with his characteristic calm, but she had seen the flicker of raw paternal fury in his eyes during the hardest moments, a fire he kept carefully banked beneath a surface of professional control. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, his voice a low rumble that was more felt than heard. Amara took a sip of the hot tea, letting it fortify her. She turned from the window, her eyes clear and resolute. "I am," she said. The quiver that had been in her voice for weeks was gone. "He needs to see that he didn't break me." "He never could," Marcus said, the statement a simple, undeniable fact. "What you're doing today, choosing to speak, that takes a courage most people will never know. I've never been prouder of you." Amara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She unfolded a piece of paper from her pocket. It was her victim impact statement. She had written and rewritten it a dozen times, pouring onto the page all the pain, humiliation, and ultimately the strength she had found. "I need to read this myself," she said, more to herself than to him. The prosecutor offered, "But I need to be the one." "I know," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Face him, speak your truth. The rest will take care of itself." Their arrival at the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse was a controlled chaos. A phalanx of reporters and photographers swarmed their black car the moment it pulled up to the curb, a cacophony of shouted questions and flashing camera bulbs. "Amara, how are you feeling?" "Dr. Thorne, is it true you used your influence? What kind of sentence are you hoping for?" Dr. Thorne guided Amara through the throng, his large frame a shield against the intrusive lenses and microphones. He didn't scowl or push. He simply moved with an implacable purpose that seemed to part the crowd. Amara kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the courthouse steps, refusing to let them see her as a mere victim to be gawked at. She was a participant in her own justice. The courtroom itself was an imposing chamber of dark wood and solemn tradition. The air was heavy with anticipation. Amara and her father took their seats in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. A few rows back, she could see the familiar, kind faces of Sarah Jennings, the purser from Flight 782, and the retired attorney, Mr. Davies. They had both come to bear witness, offering their silent support. Then, he was let in. Robert Caldwell entered from a side door, flanked by his lawyer. The change in him was staggering. The arrogant, ruddy-faced man from the plane was gone. In his place was a gaunt gray figure. His expensive suit, once a symbol of his power, now seemed to mock him, hanging loosely on his diminished frame. His eyes were sunken, darting around the room before fixing on the polished surface of the defense table. He looked haunted, a ghost of his former self, already serving a life sentence of humiliation. When the proceedings began and it came time for his plea, his voice was a dry, cracking whisper. Guilty. The word, so small, seemed to cost him everything. Before the judge pronounced sentence, the prosecutor announced, "Your Honor, the victim, Miss Amara Thorne, wishes to read her own impact statement to the court." Judge Ann Connolly, a formidable woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, nodded gravely. "Miss Thorne, you may approach the lectern." A hush fell over the courtroom. Amara walked forward, each step steady and deliberate. She placed her paper on the lectern, but she barely looked at it. She looked directly at the man who had assaulted her. "My name is Amara Thorne," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent room. 6 months ago, I was just a girl on a plane drawing in my sketchbook. I was excited to be going home to see my family. On that day, Mr. Robert Caldwell took that feeling of excitement and safety away from me. He didn't just spill coffee on me. That is the sterile, bloodless language of a legal filing. He chose to use a steaming hot beverage as a weapon. He chose to pour it on my leg and hand, causing second-degree burns, because I had accidentally brushed his arm. She paused, her gaze unwavering. Caldwell flinched, forced to listen. "The physical pain was immense," she continued. "I will have a scar on my leg for the rest of my life. But the deeper wound, the one that has been harder to heal, was the reason he did it. He didn't see a person in the seat next to him. He saw a target. He called me you people. He threw coffee on me because he believed my presence, my very existence, was an annoyance. He did it because I am a young black woman, and in his world, that meant I was less than him, that I was clumsy, that I was worthless." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. For weeks after, I was afraid. I was afraid to be in crowded places. I had nightmares about the smell of coffee, about the look of pure hatred in his eyes. He wanted to make me feel small, and for a little while he succeeded. He made me feel like the color of my skin was a target painted on my back. But then, she said, her voice rising with a newfound power, I realized that my fear was what he wanted. My silence was his victory, and I will not give him that. My skin is not a target, it is a gift. My presence is not an annoyance, it is my right. And my voice is not something to be silenced, it is something to be heard. She looked away from Caldwell then, turning her attention to the judge. I am not here today asking for vengeance, Your Honor. I am here asking for justice, and for a message to be sent. A message that says that racism, violence, and hatred have no place in our society. Not in our neighborhoods, not in our workplaces, and certainly not in a shared space like an airplane, where we are all bound together, reliant on mutual respect for our collective safety. Mr. Caldwell didn't just attack me, he attacked the very idea of a civil society. And for that, he must be held accountable. She finished, her body trembling slightly with adrenaline. As she walked back to her seat, her father squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with unspeakable pride. The entire courtroom was still, moved by the simple, powerful eloquence of her truth. Judge Connolly took a long moment before she spoke, her gaze fixed on the defendant. Mr. Caldwell, please rise. Caldwell rose unsteadily to his feet. I have listened to the statement of Miss Thorne, the judge said, her voice sharp as steel. I have read the reports, the witness testimonies, and the letters submitted on your behalf speaking of your past accomplishments. There seems to be a disconnect. The man described in those letters, a community leader, a philanthropist, a captain of industry, bears no resemblance to the man who committed the vile act of cruelty aboard Flight 782. Your lawyers argue that this was a momentary lapse in judgment, an aberration brought on by stress. I do not believe that. An act of such specific targeted malice does not spring from nowhere. It grows from a seed of prejudice that has been watered and nurtured in the dark for years. You simply felt, in that moment, powerful enough and safe enough to let it into the light. She picked up a document. You were a man of immense privilege and influence. You traveled the world in comfort and commanded respect in the halls of power. On April 16th, you chose to use that power not to lead or to inspire, but to torment and injure a 17-year-old girl. You did not merely spill coffee, Mr. Caldwell. You spilled poison, the poison of hatred and intolerance. You did so in a pressurized metal tube at 35,000 feet, a place where civility and mutual respect are paramount to the safety and security of everyone on board. Your actions constituted a profound betrayal of those principles. The judge leaned forward, her eyes boring into him. The consequences of your actions have been swift and severe, and many would say that is justice enough. She continued, You have lost your career, your reputation, and your place in society. But the court's duty is not just to acknowledge consequences, but to impose them. The message must be sent that such behavior will not be tolerated, not in our skies, and not in our country. Therefore, pursuant to your plea agreement, this court sentences you to 18 months in a federal correctional facility. Following your release, you will serve 3 years of supervised probation, during which you will be required to complete 500 hours of community service and attend mandatory anger management and racial sensitivity counseling. A restitution hearing will be scheduled to cover Miss Thorne's medical expenses and therapeutic costs. The sentence landed with a physical weight. Caldwell staggered as if struck. 18 months. It was real. U.S. Marshals moved forward, their movements practiced and efficient. As they placed the handcuffs on him, the metallic click echoed in the silent courtroom. For the last time, Robert Caldwell looked up. His eyes met Amara's. There was no apology, no remorse, only a look of pathetic, curdled hatred. He still saw her as the cause of his downfall, not his own actions. Amara looked back at him, not with hatred, but with a profound, quiet finality. He was no longer a monster in her nightmares. He was just a small, broken man being led away to pay for his choices. A chapter was finally, truly closed. On the courthouse steps, the media frenzy erupted anew. Dr. Thorne stepped to the microphones, holding up a hand for quiet. A reporter shouted, "Dr. Thorne, your critics say you used your power to unfairly target Mr. Caldwell." Marcus Thorne looked out at the sea of faces, his expression calm and unyielding. "My position gave me a platform to ensure the established protocols were followed, but it did not dictate the outcome," he said, his voice carrying with effortless authority. "Justice was served today because of a system of good people. It was served because of the courage of passengers like Mr. Davies, who refused to be silent bystanders. It was served because of the professionalism of a flight crew, Sarah Jennings, Ben Carter, and Captain Chen, who prioritized the safety of their passenger above all else. It was served by a prosecutor who believed in the case and a judge who upheld the law. My only role in this was the one that has always mattered most to me, being a father to my daughter." Another reporter turned to Amara. "Amara, after all this, what message do you have for other young people who might face something like this?" Amara stepped forward, her voice steady. "My message is simple," she said, speaking not to the cameras, but to the countless people who might be watching. "Don't let anyone's hate make you doubt your own worth. Don't ever let them make you feel small. Your voice is more powerful than you think. Use it. Speak your truth, even if it shakes." With that, her father put his arm around her. They turned away from the clamor and walked down the steps, leaving the courthouse and the wreckage of Robert Caldwell's life behind them. The cold gray sky was beginning to break, and a sliver of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating their path forward into the clear, open air. That's the incredible story of how a single act of racist arrogance on a plane led to a complete and total reckoning. It's a powerful reminder that the person you mistreat might be connected to a world you can't even imagine. Robert Caldwell thought he was untouchable, but he learned that karma, sometimes with a little help from the head of aviation safety, always collects its debt. This story shows that hate and prejudice have no place in our society, and especially not at 35,000 feet. What did you think of the swift justice delivered in this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of karma and consequences, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with notifications on so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Thanks for watching.